Ron Drotos.
Yes.
Man, welcome to Jazz Piano Skills, my friend.
Well, thank you, Bob. It's great to be here.
Man, you and I have been trying to connect for the last couple months, and your schedule is crazy, my schedule is crazy, but I am so thrilled that we both have carved out some time to sit down together, connect, and talk jazz. And I'm thrilled to introduce you to the Jazz Piano Skills community, because if they don't already know you, if they do already know you, I know they love you. And if they don't know you, I know they're going to fall in love with you. So I'm thrilled that you're here. So thank you from my heart to all the Jazz Piano Skills listeners. Thanks for coming on today.
Oh, it's great to be here, Bob. And, it's great. It occurs to me that, pianists in the old pre-internet days, we never hung out together because there's only one pianist in each rehearsal or gig, right? And now we can actually talk shop, right?
Yeah, we can interact and mingle with one another. So, man, okay, look, we got about an hour. And right. I mean, looking at your bio, looking at your credentials, looking at your background, there's no way we're going to get everything in an hour, but we're going to try. So this is going to be a fast hour. So we're going to just jump in. I want to hand the microphone over to you. And before we get into all the stuff that you're doing professionally today, I want you to rewind the clock, go back to the very beginning, your childhood, and fill us in on Ron, your family, your background, how you got into music, and how you got to where you are today. So, my friend, the microphone is yours.
Awesome. All right. So my journey is a little unusual for pianists. I didn't have piano lessons my whole upbringing.
Wow.
My father had played. He was the first rock and roll generation. So he would have been a teenager in the late 50s.
Right.
And he was playing sax and clarinet at that time. Early rock and roll, like Bill. I remember seeing like combo charts for Bill Haley and the Comets and Elvis.
Wow.
But it was also swing era stuff. So he would play at the country clubs, play saxophone every summer. When the older professionals took a vacation, he would start on lead alto, then second alto, whatever, 2 weeks as a high school student. But he played football in college and messed up his teeth or something, his embouchure. So he was learning piano as I was growing up. And he would play, these, sort of like Basin Street blues with a stiff, kind of I'd call it a medium stiff stride, like.
Right.
But I got that.
I like it, man. I'd sit and listen to that, man. So that's good.
He was great, right? So I got to absorb that early sort of, looking back, I got to absorb that early pre-bebop feeling that I eventually got. I'll talk in a while with Billy Taylor and a musician named Hale Smith, who also had developed their styles pre-bebop. So he had a really nice steady tempo. My dad, he played about 3 or 4 songs, and I heard them a lot. And I also remember, like, once or twice a week, we would my sister and I would sit around the piano and we'd sing.
Nice.
Pop songs of the late 60s, like Puff the Magic Dragon.
Nice.
And, the Purple People Eater song, things that kids would like. He probably
So dad would play and you guys would sing.
Play and we would sing along, which I think is sort of disappearing these days, right?
It sure is.
The family sitting on the piano, and it wasn't even a piano. It was just it was an old Wurlitzer electric piano my uncle had given them, right?
The little black Wurlitzer.
It was actually beige.
I know exactly which one you're talking about.
Yeah, it was probably from 65, 66, 67. Yep.
It's classic.
Yeah, definitely. So we got a lot of piano, a lot of music in the family. My dad would play acoustic guitar too, and so
did mom play at all?
No, she was always the quote non-musical person, but she would sing harmony in the car along with the radio. And then years later, I discovered an old LP from the 50s. She was in the Long Island All-State New York Choir or something. And I said, "But you never told me about this." I don't know.
Yeah, pretty musical for being non-musical.
Well, there you go. Exactly right. She sings harmony, which I'm not even that great at. So I think looking back, I don't think we could afford piano lessons even if I asked for them. But I started my first experience at the piano at age 5 or something was imagining what dinosaurs would sound like, and then I would be the Brontosaurus and the pterodactyls, and I would make these big battles with dinosaurs.
Wow.
And I think my parents encouraged that, but they also said, well, we don't want to listen to this all day. So my dad, I'll never forget this. His way of teaching me was we were living in New Jersey, in Teaneck, New Jersey. He went to the Paramus Mall. They must have had a music store there. And he came back with the Alfred Daubrege piano method, that sort of, old world general type with the big hat. And he basically, it's a primer level, and he basically said, okay, this is what a middle C looks like. You hold it for 4 beats. When you're finished with the book, let me know, and I'm going to test you on every piece. And he goes, and if you can play every piece, I'll then get you the next volume 1.
Right.
So I said, okay. And I remember going through the whole book, and I got to the second to last piece, which you'll recognize. It was that Bach Musette.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I was probably 6 at the time. That got me. I mean, oh, boy. I just couldn't get that hand independence.
Right.
But I remember thinking, if I can get this, it's going to be smoother sailing after that forever. And it probably took me about a month to get that. And so one day, he comes home from work, and I said, I got the whole book. And he's like, okay, play that one. Play that one. Play that one. And I didn't have to memorize it, but I could play the whole book. So the next day, he brought me book 1. And looking back, it's amazing because a lot of times when we take lessons, even with the best teachers, we tend not to play the pieces. Like, you don't have to learn 30 pieces and retain them all.
Right.
Go on to the next. And I had to keep that almost like a pop musician who's still playing Jumpin' Jack Flash after, 100 years, right?
Right.
Rock. So that was, I think that it got in me physically and in my ear really well. I still remember a lot of those early songs.
Yeah. So at this time, you're what age? What age are you? Right
that was about 6.
About
7,
6 years old. Okay.
Something like that, 5, 6, 7. And then I played trumpet in elementary school, and then rock guitar with my friends in middle school. And then my guitar broke at age 15 or so, and my friends were forming a rock band in high school. And I said, okay, I keep coming back to the piano in between trumpet and guitar and this, so I'm just gonna stay with piano now. And I became serious. I started playing 3 hours a day, no matter what. Fantastic. 3 hours a day from about age 15, 16 on.
Yeah, so it was about that high school time where you started getting serious.
That's right. So in the rock band, we're playing Pink Floyd's "Comfortably Numb," and I'm improvising. And then some jazzy stuff, and picking up what I can here and there, taking some theory lessons. We had a very good. I was in Connecticut by this time. We had a very good high school music program. I got to take jazz arranging.
Oh wow!
We had jazz arranging 2 times a week.
Well, see, that's very unique. That's very unique, especially at that time, right? I mean, I'm not even sure even today if they have jazz arranging in high schools.
Yeah, this would have been around 1980. And a wonderful teacher, Fred Pasqua, who had gone to New England Conservatory for classical clarinet, took lessons at Berkeley. And so he was trying to pass some of that along. So I did an arrangement of Put on a Happy Face, I remember, and big band arrangements and small group. And probably really important for me as a teenager was that there was this culture of experimentation. Like my band and my friends who played, we were into Chick Corea, Herbie Hancock, Frank Zappa, all these musicians who would play classical 1 minute, jazz the next, rock, funk, no boundaries at all. And so even though we couldn't even play, we would just try anything, crazy.
Yeah. So who was okay? So you get to high school. You've been, you really had you're working through the Alfred books or the traditional beginning piano books. You're kind of doing the rock and roll thing. You got your buddies. You're doing the garage band scene and playing pop and rock tunes. You get this guy in high school that introduces you to jazz. I'm just curious, who was like the very first jazz musician at that stage that you listened to, that turned you on, that you went like, whoa, wait a minute, I've got to study this genre. I got to play jazz. Who was that?
Yeah, there's 2 levels to this answer. Keith Jarrett is the the Cone concert. And I must have heard it about 4 years after it came out. Right. I just remember listening. I had no idea what he was doing, but the Cone concert, which is biggest
Right.
selling solo piano record. But the interesting thing is, so that was I was age 15 when I got turned
Right.
on to the home concert. And then his early stuff, like there's an album called Nude Ants, which is like nude dance, spelled
Yeah.
different. Live at the Vanguard. I used to listen to that. This is before his standards trio, you know. And coincidentally, though, I heard Elton John last February of 2022 for the first time. It was his second to last show. Maybe no, it was his last show at Madison Square Garden ever, so to speak. Who knows if he'll come back? But
Yeah, because he's been doing his final tour now for what, 8 years?
for like 10 years. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but he said it's his last show. Well, we'll see what happens. But the interesting thing is, he starts his third song that night was Border Song.
Okay.
And he played it solo without his band.
Wow.
And I'm listening to it, and after about, I don't know, a chorus or so, tears start streaming down my face. I'm like in the last row at the Garden, crying. And I realized that before I got into Jarrett, when I was about 14, I got a cassette tape of Elton John's greatest hits. It was the first one I ever bought, and that was on there.
Oh, yeah.
So I haven't been crediting Elton as being as big an influence.
Yeah, so you heard that, and that took you back, didn't it?
It really did. I mean, it was just unbelievable, right?
Yeah. It's interesting. You know, you and I are probably about the same age. You know, high school during the 70s. Is that when you went to high school, or am I older?
Yeah, 78 to like 81, 82.
Okay, so I'm a little older than you. I graduated in 79, but my path was kind of the same path that you took, right? I was kind of poking around I started as a drummer, so I was playing rock and roll drums in the garage bands, and I would always be fascinated with the piano players, and so I started poking around, playing some rock tunes on the piano, and I was introduced. My first introduction. This is hilarious because you mentioned this name earlier, and we'll talk about that later. But I remember this piano teacher put on some Oscar Peterson, and I must have looked like a deer in headlights. Like, you know, my jaw must have been hanging on the floor, my eyes must have been glazed over or something, because he only let me listen to about like 3 minutes, and he took the needle off the record and said, "Okay, let's try something else." You know, because
cold water on you or something.
Yeah. So anyway, he grabbed a Billy Taylor album. And he put Billy Taylor on. And it was interesting because Billy Taylor, when I heard Billy Taylor, I got very excited because that seemed kind of more like down-to-earth, straight-ahead jazz. I mean, Oscar is a virtuoso, right? Yeah. So he just blew me away. So Billy Taylor was my first idol, jazz idol that I admired, that I started to try to emulate.
Oh, wow. Small world. Yeah. Billy, when I was in college, you know, I was at the University of Connecticut, and my freshman year, you know, this is before the internet, right? And so this would have been summer of 82, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, summer of 82, summer of 83. So spring of 83, I saw an ad that at University of Massachusetts, they had a Jazz in July program, Billy Taylor. And I knew the name. And I said, because he wrote for Keyboard Magazine. Remember Keyboard Magazine?
Oh, I sure do remember Keyboard Magazine.
Temporary Keyboard at first. I was reading his articles, and I said, I've got to check this out. So I sent in a cassette tape and got accepted. And I went back for 4 summers and stayed in touch with him throughout the year. Very nice man. And, you know, I didn't push it, but once in a while, you know, I'd ask him, "Hey, you want to go out to dinner?" And so we go out to dinner, a Chinese restaurant or something, and I'd go see him play. He made me some cassette tapes of then out-of-print albums by Billy Strayhorn and Duke Ellington, and you know, he was a direct connection with Art Tatum. You know.
Oh yeah.
Have you read his book? It's a Jazz Piano: A History.
Let me see. Do you happen to be talking about this one?
Unbelievable.
Oh, yeah, you're talking about this one.
But
what do you think? You're talking to a hack here, man? What do you
Unbelievable. Well, it's not a common book. It's
not a common book, but it's, you know what, I recommend that book all the time because I think it's such a really concise and great way to get acclimated to the jazz scene, the history of jazz. It's fabulous.
Yeah, he tells a story in there which in retrospect sometimes gets me a little emotional. You know, why did he take an interest in this kid who I had the spark, right? But I didn't have a lot of previous training and everything, but I was soaking up what he could absorb. But he tells the story in there, you'll remember, when he went to see Fats Waller, and he was a teenager, and he wanted to ask Fats a question, and he choked up. He froze up, and Fats walked right by him. Yeah. And he said he would never pass up the opportunity of asking one of the masters a question. And I would ask millions of questions. How do you do this? What was it like doing that? And I remember walking across campus with him to lunch and just asking about Artatum and everything. And I think he saw a little bit of his younger self in me.
Yeah, we could have, if things would have been a little differently. We might have been neighbors, man, because when I was finishing up I had finished my master's degree at the University of North Texas and was starting my doctorate degree, and he was down at UNT doing master classes and some clinics and stuff. And my classical teacher down there introduced me to him, and we spent the week together. And he invited me to come to New York and to study with him. And I had just started. I was really just in the beginning throes of my doctorate. And I thought about it, and I told him I was going to stay and finish my doctorate, and then I would connect with him. Of course, that never happened because I just stayed and did my doctorate and then stayed in Texas. But I do recall him being such a nice guy.
Yeah, really. And coincidentally, when I moved to New York, I lived in Manhattan for 16 years, but now I live right near his old neighborhood in St. Petersburg. I saw him once. Excuse me. I saw him once. He had had a stroke, and I didn't really follow up. I wanted to respect the fact that he had gotten more famous, and everybody wants a piece of that, right? But my kid's babysitter lived in his building, and we dropped her off one day, and I saw him getting in the elevator, and I said hi, and it's nice to.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So so then you go to University of Connecticut. Is that where you studied music? Is that where
Yes.
Okay, so tell us a little about your formal education days and college days.
Yeah, I went for 4.5 years because I just wanted to take the classes I wanted to take. I just got a bachelor's in music composition, classical composition. And at the same time, they had some jazz classes, and there was a teacher named Ellen Rowe who was excellent, who led a jazz band. And
they probably had jazz classes, but not a jazz degree. Is that correct?
Correct. They might have a jazz degree now, I'm not sure, but they had jazz classes. And so they got Ellen, who was is an excellent teacher and a great person. And my first year was, I caught the end of the career of a contemporary Billy Taylor's named Hale Smith. I don't know, he's a contemporary classical composer who had also played jazz around that same era as Billy. They were born in 25 and 24, respectively, or whichever. And he could really get that stride going, the walking tenths and a slow, relaxed stride. He was good friends with Dizzy Gillespie. He had taught Eric Dolphy how to play.
Wow.
These people would go to him. He and Eric worked out of Hindemith's elementary training for musicians together. He taught Eric out of that, which is what may have led Dolphy to be able to hear those polychords and everything.
Yeah.
And Hale's influence on me.
Yeah. Hey, another real quick story on Billy Taylor. He was down here in Texas. I can't remember the exact year. It was in the 90s, I guess, late 90s. And he was playing at Borders Books and Records.
Wow.
That's kind of like a Borders Books. I don't know if you're familiar with that chain. It's no longer around, but it's kind of like a Barnes & Noble, right?
Right.
So I said, man, I'm going to reconnect with Billy Taylor. I'm going to go down and check it out. He's playing at Borders Books and Records. And I can remember thinking, it's kind of odd, right? But okay, whatever, So I'm going down. Well, no one was there. I mean, it was just like Billy Taylor there and sitting at the piano, and I'm sitting next to him. And I'll never forget it, right? Because they had the coffee. Those bookstores have the coffee shop built into the bookstore, right? So he's sitting there playing All the Things You Are, revert everything, all the changes and everything in the right hand, soloing and playing melody in the left hand, just come flip-flop how we're used to playing it, right? And my jaw is just like on the floor. One of the high school girls come up from the coffee bar and says, shh, can you keep it down? You're playing a little too loud. And I was like, oh my
Oh my goodness! Wow. No, I know that.
And then to tell you how nice a guy he was, he nodded his head and he said, "Okay," and he just, yeah, and that's Billy Taylor. Yeah, it's unbelievable.
That's amazing. Yeah, another arrangement. You know, he would do this thing.
Yes.
He would do that whole thing, and it's what he had gotten from Art Tatum, but he made it his own. Billy had the as you know, he had the ability to play in the style of so many other.
Oh my gosh!
musicians.
Right.
When he played his own stuff, it was uniquely him. You didn't really hear that.
Right.
It was astonishing he could do that.
Yeah, there's no doubt he could be the Rich Little of jazz piano. There's, you know what I mean? He could imitate.
Yeah.
He could imitate anybody, no doubt about it. So, okay, so go back to you finish your degree at Connecticut, University of Connecticut, and so then what happens? You got your. Did you say composition?
Music composition degree, classical composition. Yeah.
Okay, so you graduate with a music composition degree, and I know you had to say, well, now what?
Well, you know, remember, yeah. Well, first of all, when I was in school, there was a connecting thing, a connecting thread, because when I was in school, some of us musicians, we in the music department, 4 vocalists and 4 instrumentalists, the rhythm section, we started a band. We called it Grand Central, and it was like the Manhattan Transfer. We had the 4-part harmony, and we used to play weddings and bars and restaurants, but we used to open for famous groups at the New Haven Jazz Festival. So we'd open for Dave Brubeck and Glenn Miller Orchestra and Lionel Hampton. We'd play for 26,000 people sometimes. So, and that continued after college. So I did have some gigs, and I moved back to Stamford, Connecticut, where my parents were, and lived with them for 2 years. And I'd come into Manhattan, and I would just, there was a lot of music at that time. And remember the musicians from the 50s were still active. One of my best friend's fathers was Sal Salvador, the guitarist who had played with Stan Kenton. Mm-hmm. And it was just wonderful. You could you had access to these people, and so I just tried to make connections and gig locally and everything. And I would take lessons with Harold Danko.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Harold, he had played with Chet Baker, and he had just finished playing with Gerry Mulligan. I'd come in for like 2 lessons. Fabulous pianist. 2 or 3 lessons a year with him, and when I moved to Manhattan, Harold would send me some like beginning piano students that he didn't have time to. Yeah, he's a very generous, nice person, a great player. So I'd come in a few times a year and just check in with him. And he goes, Ron, you know, Gerry Mulligan's looking for an assistant. You know, it's not playing piano, but it's carrying his sax because he can't carry his sax. He had a bad back, and you know, you'll go to Europe a few times, whatever, and photocopying music. It was very easy. Wow. So, and he lived about 15 minutes from me in Connecticut. He lived in Darien. So I'd go over his house like 3 hours a day and photocopy music and this. And I got to Europe, 3 times. We went to, it was incredible. And one time was with this big band, and we hit all the jazz festivals in Europe, like the North Sea, Montreux. And I would just get, you know, all I had to do was get up in the morning, bring the drums to the bus, bring the 3 cases of music to the bus, and then basically do nothing for 12 hours. And then hang out. I got to meet Dizzy Gillespie, everybody. And,
smart. Yeah, how cool is that? I'm curious, when you were over at Gerry Mulligan's house, you know, just him, you know, in his jammies, and you're, you know, whatever, hanging out, and did you ever go, hey man, let's play a tune?
No, you know, a couple times we did. He wasn't the kind of person, he was, you wouldn't really go there with him if he didn't want to do it. But we did play a few times. We played some blues together. I think he just wanted to hear how I could play, and that was a thrill. But you know what he would do? He wasn't a really formally educated musician. He picked up everything he knew from hanging out, you know? Yeah. Even when he wanted to learn classical music, because he was Gerry Mulligan and he had a house in Milan. His wife was from Italy. He had an open invitation to just go to La Scala and sit there with the score during rehearsal. So that's how he learned how to write for an orchestra. But he was self-taught basically. But he would ask me like, you know, Ron, can you play this lead sheet, you know, tune he just write? He's like, can you play this and let me know if you like how I wrote the chords? Like, should it be F minor 6th or D minor 7 flat 5 or something? You know,
yeah, right.
My opinion on chord notation sometimes.
Yeah, nice.
Which staggered me. But I'll tell you the thing I learned from Gerry the most. I had never seen anybody give 110% every single minute. Tuning up his sax, putting the mouthpiece in his mouth, he'd turn bright red and the veins would protrude on his neck. He was that focused.
Intense, right?
I've never seen that before. And I've seen it since, but never before that.
Well, why? It's so wild that you've had such a great start. Here you are now out of college. You're traveling with Gerry Mulligan. Now you're back and professionally, man. And this is where I want to get to now. I mean, holy moly, you got a lot of irons in the fire, my friend. So we're going to try to talk about some of those, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, my first introduction to you was, as we all poke around on the internet, and find things. You have this program out there. I don't know if you're still doing it or if it's all complete, but you were going through the real book like a journey through the real book, like every single tune in the real book, and you were teaching that tune to whoever wanted to sit and listen and learn from you. So it was like a lesson from you on that song, and the format was, I'm just going to go from A to Z through the real book. So can you talk about that project? How did that come about, and where is it now, and how did it all come together?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm on 248 out of 400. So yeah, it's insane. So I gave myself an 8-year project, one a week for 8 years, but now I'm doing 2 a week because I want to get through this. But it's my whole YouTube, is an extension of my video course, at keyboardimprov.com, which I started in 2012. And it's funny how a little German of just like music, Beethoven did this. And then it became a big symphony, right?
Right.
It's that little idea. So the old real book, as you remember, the 5th edition.
Oh, I know.
Wasn't quite legit yet. They at the bottom of each page, they used to have a song, an album, right? So Autumn Leaves at the bottom. It says
right.
Yeah, Bill Evans' Portrait in Jazz.
Exactly. Right.
And then so just one source for this, and before the internet, so you can at least hear how the tune goes. You go, the whole album. You got this great Bill Evans album. So I said, with the internet, I said, and this new version of the real book, which is great, but they don't do that. So I said, my first thought was just make a blog post and find for all 400 songs in the new real book.
Great idea.
To put an album.
Yeah, great idea.
I said, well, I can really create a resource. So the first thing I did was I created what I call the Jazz Pianist Ultimate Guide to the Real Book, where I have 400 separate pages, one page for each tune, where I list some recordings, I put some links to videos, I put links to resources like transcriptions of the tune or so-and-so soloing, some of my stuff. And I created 400 pages with an index and everything. That's on my Keyboard Improv website. And that was getting some good feedback, really helping people out.
Right.
Then I said, I should make a video for each one. And I'm also doing it to keep myself, challenged and everything.
No doubt.
Because how many of those Ornette Coleman tunes did we ever learn?
Yeah, right.
But if I'm on number 58 and Ornette Coleman's Chippy is 59 or something, I can't avoid this. I put this out in the public that I'm going to do every tune in the order of the book.
Oh, I know it. I thought you were very brave, man. When I heard that, I said, man, now there's a brave soul right there, man.
I'm nothing if not brave. So we're clueless. Clueless and bravery are kind of like, heading headfirst into battle. And, wait a minute, where's my bagpipes,
Yeah, right. I'll be the bagpipe player for you, man.
Exactly. So like on that tune, for instance, not many people have really solved the problem of playing Ornette Coleman's tunes on piano, really. He didn't really use piano that much. Right. So what I did on that was I took the melody, which has different rhythms. It's like a bebop melody on Chippy, and I played it in the left hand as quarter notes, and I made it my walking bass line.
Yeah.
And I improvise. So it makes me be creative and solve these problems, and then share it with people and try to get them to get beyond the notes. And it's really the other thing though that I try to do. Being in I don't think I'm not one of these people who thinks the old days are the good old days and
right.
Good. But the internet's amazing. It's why we're doing this today, right?
Correct. Right.
But,
right.
Yeah. But on the other hand, there is you want to get the best of both worlds, and
Correct.
that's not as many people are getting these days. So it's all about licks and chord scales and this, and not many people are understanding that even these tunes were often sung originally.
Yeah, right.
You know,
Yeah.
these are tunes that were pop songs.
Yeah, and you know.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was going to say you bring up such a great point, because in the jazz world and with students in the jazz world, they often fall into that trap, right? That old is outdated and new is hip. You know, I just mentioned this on a podcast episode not too long ago, that please do not fall in the trap of thinking that traditional shell voicings are somehow inferior to chordal voicings, and right, and don't fall into the trap of thinking that a seventh chord is somehow superior to a triad, or a ninth is superior to a seventh. You know, and it happens all the time, and you and I, as educators, have to help people avoid that trap.
Yeah, I saw, Chick Corea was putting out videos, right, from his home his last few years. And on one of them, I forget which one, but he said when he was starting out as a kid, he played Take the A Train like this. It's what I call a simple stride, because,
Right.
And these days, people go right to rootless 13ths, which is great. But they don't even know the seventh chord sometimes, and then they get frustrated. And what if you played 30 tunes like that? It's what I call moving laterally, right?
Yeah, right. Well, yeah. Well, I try to tell young students. I said, you know what the best syllabus is for studying jazz? It's already been created. It's called history.
Right.
Start at the beginning. And just follow the historical evolution of it. But you can't just throw out 100 years and jump in at Chick Corea and go, okay, here we go. And so oftentimes people try to do that as well.
Exactly. So the real beginning of the jazz would have been literally jazzing up the melodies.
Right. That's exactly right.
Melodies, right? Before you're learning your mix
that's right.
Flat vocal scales. So yeah, absolutely. So
well, I used to have a teacher who used to say that if you can't improvise with the melody, you have no business trying to improvise.
That's great.
So okay, so this real book project is going on. You're in the throes of that. You have your website. What's the title of your website again?
Keyboardimprov.com.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So you got your website. You got the real book thing. You got a new book that I want to talk about. And all of that, all of these projects can be put under one big umbrella called educator, music teacher. And in order to be a music educator or a music teacher, to be involved with all the various projects that you're involved with, you have to have a real passion for it, and you have to have a heart for it, what I call a teacher's heart. So take a second and talk about your teacher's heart, because somewhere along the line, the teacher's heart erupted and you got involved in wanting to share and teach. Talk about that for a second.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. That's a really good question, Bob. I don't know when it started. It probably, with you too, it probably started much earlier than we think. We were probably the other kids showing the people in the sandbox how to put the right amount of water in the pail to get the castle.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, right.
So it must have started back then. But I think what it comes down to is going back to like my high school and college years, and even when I was playing Broadway, you come into contact with a group of musicians that just love it. Right. And you just share and you help each other out and this and that.
Right.
And I think it's the same thing with students. I mean, it did start early. In high school, one of my jobs was as the busboy at a restaurant. So I'd clear the tables and everything in Stamford, Connecticut. And they had an upright piano. And one day they get this guy who's probably about 30 years old to come in and play and sing. And his name was Tony. We became friends. And after the shift, he's like packing up and being a musician, I went up and I said, "Hey, you sound great. I play piano too." And he's like, "Oh, play something for me." So I played "Darn That Dream" or something.
Oh, wow.
And he wasn't really a jazzer. He was more like a Billy Joel type, and
Okay,
he
right.
knew some jazz, but really good at that. But he wanted to learn more about harmony, so he said, "Can you give me lessons?" I'm the busboy at the restaurant, age like 17.
Oh,
And
see,
he
that's
comes to my house for
well,
lessons.
well, see, that's great, man.
So it started there, and I just love it because I find, well, first of all, I love it personally because it's very gratifying to get people to the point where they can, the water begins to flow. They can start
Right.
becoming fluent. And it's like Billy Taylor used to always tell me, he probably told you, he said, we learn to improvise the same way we learn language. Did you ever hear him say that? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And-
That's 100% true.
Yeah, and so the analytical way of thinking, okay, I've got this chord, I've got this scale, or I'm playing the third, that it has a place, but it's not the first thing we do when we learn language. Nobody's telling a toddler, okay, we're going to have the theory of adjectives. Okay? That would hold them back, right?
Oh, man. Right.
Or, you can't say that word again until you say it correctly.
Right. Oh, my gosh. Right.
Being a rock band or whatever the equivalent is with our music, we need to jam with musicians who are at our level and just have so much fun. It never occurred to me as a teenager whether I was playing well or not.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you're familiar with if you're familiar with this book, man. If you're familiar with this book, I'm going to be thoroughly impressed. So just
Probably
lie.
not.
Well, just lie. If you're not, just lie to me, and I'll still be thoroughly impressed. This is a book by Christopher Small, and it's called Musicking. And Christopher Small is no longer with us, but he was, he never wanted to be penned down as a music sociologist or a music psychologist or a music anthropologist, or he never wanted. He didn't want labels, but the one thing he talks about in this book, and why I keep it on my shelf, is he talks about how we got to stop treating music as a noun and start treating it as a verb. It's what we do. And you bring up this language thing, and Billy Taylor referencing language. He was saying that musical expression, your ability, that it's a birthright. You have a birthright to be musically expressive, just like you have a birthright to speak. And so our job is to help everybody tap into their birthright of being expressing themselves musically. And like you said, some of us are better with words than others. Some of us can write better than others. But we never say to the person who's not great with words, don't ever talk again.
Yeah.
We never say to the person who's not good at is not the greatest at writing, saying, hey, you know what? Don't ever sit down and pour your heart out in a letter. Don't ever do that.
Right.
We never say to somebody who's a bad golfer, stop golfing. Right?
They never say that up to themselves, but with music, we say it to ourselves sometimes.
Exactly. And so our job is to help people, regardless of where they are within the confines of their skills, is to have them have the courage, and we'll talk about that a little bit because you talk about that in your book, the courage to sit down and just express yourself musically at whatever level that you play. And it's going to be fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's another aspect too, which you're sort of implying too. The benefits we get from playing music are independent of our quote talent or ability.
Correct.
Just the happy chemicals that are released.
Oh my gosh!
Emotional,
right?
the de-stressing, the community aspect, right?
Yeah. Because I tell students all the time, geez, if the criteria was that we all had to play with the technical skills and ability of Oscar Peterson, well then here's my piano, you can have it. I'm done.
Yeah. Right.
It's over for me. I can no longer play. So
exactly right.
So okay. So you obviously have this teacher's heart. So let's talk about this book that you have. I love it. The Inner Game of Piano Improvisation. Fantastic. So how did this project come about?
Well, I've been writing. One of the things I started doing in 2012 when I created my keyboardimprov.com website was I started writing a blog. And first, with many bloggers, at first, it's sort of a weird term, right? Bloggers. I'm a musician.
I never got it, but anyway.
Yeah, I'm a blogger too. So whatever that means. So you write like once a month, and you get an idea for something, you write another, and then I started challenging myself to write every day for a while. I don't write every day anymore, but over 10 years, I have like, I don't know, 1,300 blog posts.
Oh man,
and then and a weekly newsletter. I do a newsletter just to my students, my online students, and then I do another one to mailing list. People sign up for my newsletter, and so I probably had about 1,800 of these things I've written over the years. So last December 2021, I took my kids skiing in upstate New York, and I don't ski. So if you or anybody else is watching has been in a ski lodge for 8 hours, 2 days in a row, you know that you want to find something to do. So I brought my laptop, and I had my cup of tea and hot chocolate for them when they came in, and I said, you know what? There's a book in here. So I created a Word document, and I spent 8 hours dragging like about 250 of these that had to do with the inner game, the mental game, the healthy attitude about improvisation, and some nuts and bolts and practice ideas.
Right.
And then the next day I went back and I spent 8 hours dividing it into 20 chapters. And then I spent the next, and I thought it was almost done. Well, 8 months later,
right.
8 months later, I've managed to organize it in a way that has a flow. I cut out redundancies, and I have it takes the reader on a journey from what is improvisation, and relating it to our everyday life, and that we are creative, and getting over that to letting the music flow. The cure for practice paralysis. I call it when people are so overwhelmed that they don't do anything. Right. Cure for practice paralysis. All the way through. I have a whole chapter on practicing. I call it Into the Woodshed.
Yes, I saw it. I read it.
One on jazz piano, and then going beyond what we think is possible with ourselves. And I also made over 3 hours of audio links. So
that's really impressive, man. Because in the book, right, you click on those links, or you scan the link, and it takes you right to a video presentation that you do, and it's really impressive, man. I as I was reading your book and going through it, I was, the only thing, before it just after after the enjoyment of the content. My second thought is, golly, how much work, how much time did all that take? Because that's quite a project. Yes, and I wrote some new stuff for it too. It's not just the blog post, but I hope when you read it, you felt it read as a book. It's not. You can read little sections, but it has a flow and very user friendly. So what I want to do, I'm just going to throw out a couple chapter titles, and I want you to talk about those chapters because I love the chapter titles. I'm just going to throw out the chapter and then let you talk about it. Okay. Right. So the very first chapter. What is improvisation? Oh, come on, man. Tell me.
Yeah, in our society now, we have such a high mental bar that we think to improvise is this huge creative step that in order to play well on piano and improvise, the planets have to align right in the right way. Lightning has to hit me twice. And I have to play 10 times better than I've ever played before in order to sound decent.
Right.
That's improvising. But we improvise every time we go to the refrigerator to see what's in there to make a sandwich. And if there's no mayo, we use mustard. That's improvising.
Right.
Every time we spread the mayonnaise on the sandwich, we improvise the amount.
Right.
Right?
There's always improvisation, right?
Yeah, we're improvising every time we speak. We don't know it. I'm not going to plan out, okay, when I see my friend, I'm going to be sure to ask her how her day was. And then I'll segue into this, We improvise. We use the language, and music's no different. It's like Billy Taylor said. So that's what's improvisation. You're already improvising every day. Almost everything we do in life is improvising.
Yeah, and once somebody starts to realize that, hopefully the fear of doing that with the piano starts to evaporate and go away. So I think I loved it. You addressed it right away, very first chapter. So okay, how about this one? And I think this is a great one. You have a chapter called Operation Theory Overload, and in today's age. I got to just tell you, man, it was bad enough when we were growing up, right? It was bad enough we would go get books, we would buy the entire Jamie Aebersold catalog and begin reading it. There was information that we could get our hands on. But today, Oh my goodness, it's even worse, right? With the internet, there's all kinds of videos and documents and PDFs and everything that you can have access to. So it's easy for somebody to overload on theory. So talk about this chapter and what was your goal with inserting this into your book?
Okay, yeah. So first of all, I really want to point out that almost every book and video made is probably very valid and well-intentioned and expert.
Oh, no doubt.
And all that, right?
No doubt.
By itself. The challenge is that it's general advice. It's not saying to a particular person, okay, you're at this stage right now. You can take the A train like this. I think the best step for you might be to learn the rootless voicings now. But let's take a little step back and work on playing it in tempo with a simple stride. And you're going to learn how to play the modes. You're going to learn, so that's what's missing. And you combine millions of dictums, like you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to do the 5 ways to do this, the 5 ways to do that. If you want to sound good, you have to learn these 30 techniques. And you multiply that by however many instructors and students are, it's this avalanche of overload.
Right.
And I think if the reason I came up with that title is I think if anybody or a group of people in, say, 1980 wanted to prevent future generations from feeling good about themselves and really learning how to improvise or play jazz or rock or whatever, they would invent Operation Theory. Okay, we're going to overload them with theory to the point where and I talk about practice paralysis, where they just don't do anything.
Right.
It's amazing. It's amazing. So
yeah. Well, and you know what else is interesting that I have found in my years of teaching, and I'm guilty. I personally have been guilty of this in my journey. Isn't it funny how we hear things that were never stated in reading these books and getting advice? Like, for instance, I'll give you a great example. I hear every jazz musician on the face of planet Earth, in every book that I've ever read, I've heard musicians say that you should practice in all 12 keys, right? Good advice. And I used to read that advice or read that sentence as an incomplete sentence, and I would put at the end of that sentence every day. And I realized that no one told me to practice in all 12 keys every day. They told me to practice in all 12 keys.
That's interesting. Yes.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So I actually put upon myself, I was reading into the material that which wasn't even there, making my journey even harder, even more difficult. And when I realized that, wait a minute, I don't have to practice. Yes, I should be practicing in all 12 keys, but not every day.
That's right. Or somebody else might say, I have to practice jazz standards in every key.
Right.
So like maybe the way to start would be playing Mary Had a Little Lamb in F sharp. Right? And
there you go. Right.
That's the part that we often need somebody to guide us with, right?
Well, that's exactly right. Transcriptions is a great example of this. I start students with transcribing a Hank Williams Sr. tune,
great,
or a Willie Nelson tune, something, right? Who says your first transcription has to be Bill Evans, for heaven's sakes? Oh my gosh, are you kidding me? But it's interesting how we get this theory overload going, and we start piling it on. Whether intentional or not intentional, it happens, and it's like you said, paralysis. It actually prevents us. It's stagnation. It prevents us from moving forward.
Yeah, exactly.
So, okay, so I got another title for you here. Speaking of that, which is a perfect segue in this, Enjoying the Journey is another chapter that you have.
Enjoying the journey, yeah. I mean, I think classical pianists, at least some of them, can do this. Certainly rock and pop. But a classical pianist might look at a piece of music that's very difficult, like a Chopin etude, and it's kind of fun working it out. Like, okay, I'm going to play this left hand 30,000 times, just a little faster each time.
Right.
And that they're enjoying the journey. They're not waiting until they can play it perfectly to enjoy it. At least some of them. Some of them go the other way. But with jazz, we tend to say, okay, I can't play giant steps at light speed, so I'm a failure and I can't play and I hate this. But what if you, another thing I talk about, I think on one of the audios, is what if you took giant steps and, okay, my journey right now is to just get to know these chords.
Yeah, good point.
And I'm just going to listen to them and I'm actually going to enjoy listening to them.
Right.
Even though I can't play it fast, I can't play them in rootless voicings, I can't improvise like John Coltrane yet. Right. Enjoy the journey. So this is the thing that I did get from that high school rock band in our forays into jazz. We would just play one chord, A minor 7, and improvise. It never even occurred to me that I needed to practice it in all 12 keys that same day. I mean, for months, we just played one chord for 20 minutes a day. And we loved it.
Well, you know what's funny about that, Ron? Is I tell students all the time that's actually the highest form of musical expression that you can do. When you bathe in a sound, when you have the courage just to sit down and bathe in that sound, that takes there's a lot of joy in that. There's a lot of fun that can take place in that. There's a lot of latitude that you have with that. You know, and I've always used as an example, I always tell students in my office, in my studio here, I said, you know, if Miles Davis came back to life and came into this room right now as he was getting his horn out and he would say, what are we going to play? And if I said to Miles Davis, we're going to jam on C minor, as he was blowing into his mouthpiece, he would say, cool, who's going first, you or me? In other words, that would not be a shocking statement to him.
That's
right? That would not be a shocking statement to him. He would go like, cool, what's the groove and who's going first? I mean, after all, so what, right?
Yeah.
So basically, you know, let you stretch. So it's funny how something like that can be, a lot of times, again, students will perceive that as being rudimental. One chord, are you kidding me? How babyish is that? It's not babyish. I think it's the highest form of musical exploration that you can undertake.
Oh, absolutely. And look at ragas in India.
Yeah, right.
Or Gregorian chant, or different Irish music. You know, traditional. It's on one scale, right?
Right.
You know, you go to a medieval fair or a Renaissance fair, and they're playing the Dorian boat. That's not very different than just a different rhythm, but it's
right.
This type of music.
Right. Excellent point, man. Okay, so here's another title, another chapter in your book, which I think is very important, and I think a lot of times students we miss the boat here. Listening. Right. Great chapter, by the way.
Thank you. So this musician I studied with in college, Hale Smith, he had the best ears out of anybody I've ever met. Best musical ears. I mean, literally, he could look at a Stravinsky score, and if somebody left out a note, he would know which note was left out. You know, unbelievable. You know, like people. You know, what famous musicians would look up to him, you know, for his ear and everything. He had a statement that shocked me. He said, a musician that cannot hear is like a painter that cannot see. And I realized how vague my conception of listening to music was, you know, like not hearing details or I remember the first time in college when he or somebody else suggested that I improvise and I just play the notes I hear in my head. Which sounds so obvious right now to do that, but that seemed weird. Like, really? I have to listen to what's in my head and play? And so it all comes down to listening. And I think it was Count Basie. I'm not sure. I think in, was it Good Morning Blues, his autobiography? I think he might have mentioned that he had a one-word answer to any musical question. So anybody asked him a question, he'd say, listen. So ask any question. How do I keep a steady beat? Listen. And what am I listening for? I'm listening for the space between the notes. I'm listening to my own internal flow. I'm listening to the other musicians.
Right. Listening
will solve almost any musical problem. And then the part that it doesn't solve, then you bring the theory into it, not the other way around.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. The listening followed by a very important question. The question should always be, what was that? What was that? And what I mean by that, I tell students all the time, because you've probably experienced this with your teaching. When it comes to listening and it comes to musical ears, like the quote that you just said, a musician who cannot hear is like a painter who cannot see, right? Well, a lot of times when saying that to a student, like a beginning student, fear will come over their face because they're thinking in the back of their mind, I can't hear. I don't hear like what you're hearing. And I always remind them that I always say to them, if I said to you dog barking, do you hear that? And they say yes. So we don't need a dog barking right now for you to hear that, right? Correct. If I say helicopter, can you hear that? How about police car siren? Can you hear that? And of course, the answer to all that is yes. I said, these are sounds that you have become familiar with, that you can identify. Well, music is sound. And so if you can't hear a major seventh right now, it's not because your ears are bad. You haven't been introduced to the sound, and you haven't practiced and studied the sound so that your ears can recall it, just like it recalled dog barking or helicopter, right? Now joy comes over their face because they realize, wow, well then introduce me to the sounds. And that's where you and I come in as educators. We have to introduce people, I always say all the time, to the shapes and sounds of music. And once you get introduced to those shapes and sounds, it's amazing how smart you become.
Absolutely. And also listening is, like you were saying before with music or whatever, it's a verb.
Right.
It's not the ideal that you want to get to in 30 years to start with. It's towards that direction. It's like walking.
Right.
Like moving towards there. I'm walking.
You're exactly right.
Starting where I am, and I'm trying to get over there. I'm listening.
That's exactly right. Okay, you mentioned this chapter. You mentioned this chapter a little earlier too, so I want you just to expound on it a little bit. Into the woodshed.
Into the woodshed, yeah.
It's a going into the woodshed is a very common expression amongst musicians. But for those who may not be familiar with that, talk to us a little bit what you mean about going into the woodshed.
Okay, so you picture a house with a backyard, in a wooded area usually, or maybe not. And in the days before central heating, people would have a shed, usually a wall-less. Without walls, but a roof to protect from the rain, and they'd have their firewood there. That's called a woodshed. And it's not really originally for pianists, but with saxophonists and very loud horns, if they practiced repetitive things that maybe the neighbors didn't always want to hear, or the family members, scales and such, they would go out to the woodshed to practice. So they're protected from the elements, and it's a little farther away, I don't think Charlie Parker had a woodshed, and his mother apparently got threatened with eviction because he was playing the horn about 13, 16 hours a day for 3 years.
I can understand so.
So now it's a generic term that means, even for piano players in your house, that we go into the woodshed when we sit down, we really buckle down. Okay, I'm going to really get this. So I use that as kind of a fun title of, I think it's the longest chapter in the book. It's with practice, ideas on how to practice, what to practice schedules, specific ideas on how to practice.
Yeah, that's
just
fantastic.
From all different angles.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And then the last chapter of the book I thought was so wonderful, and I'm glad you put it in there. The last chapter in your book is entitled Getting Beyond What We Think is Possible. Yeah. So important. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, there's so much there because the truth is, and nobody really talks about this, but we actually don't know what's possible for us. We really have no idea what's possible for ourselves. I mean, and actually, I think one place we do see it in life, and it's very unfortunate though. But people are put in positions that are impossible, whether it's in situations of war or things where you have to stay up for 3 days without sleeping, whatever, and or helping people that are hurt, and you find time after time people go way beyond what they could have ever thought they could do. Right? I've never been in that position myself. I know people who have, so I'm not saying it lightly, but it just goes to show us as an example that we have potential and strength and abilities.
Right.
That and music's a great place to explore that. Like, so you could look at it in two different ways. You could say, well, I can't ever envision myself playing John Coltrane's Countdown at at that tempo.
Right.
Hey, I can envision myself playing it. I'm in the wrong key. Okay, there. I can do that.
Yeah, you can.
And if I can play it at 50 beats per minute,
right?
Then I'll try it at 52.
Right.
And then after a few
Right.
months, I can probably get up to about 150, 200, 250. Or in a few years, if I'm a beginner, just try it now, come back to it. And I'm going way beyond what I thought was possible.
Yeah, and you know what? And in the long run, you might end up just enjoying it better at 120 anyway.
Absolutely. And there's no reason why you can't.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
So,
and don't we do that? Oftentimes I hear recordings and I always go like, well, I like that tune played at a much slower tempo.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, because you can actually think, you can express something. And then the other thing are these sort of quantum leaps. Like one time, in addition to jazz, I used to play a lot of Broadway. I helped create a show called Swing on a Star in the 90s. And,
wow.
and so I got called into this rehearsal once to play for 2 weeks. And without any information. They just said, show up at a rehearsal studio on Broadway and 18th Street and at 10 in the morning. And I walk in, and there's 16 dancers all dressed in black. And Gwen Verdon, the legendary Broadway dancer. And I'd met once. She did like me. I don't know why, but she does, which helped me. So I walk in, and I realize it's the rehearsals for the show called Fosse, which eventually made it to Broadway. They did a workshop performance of it for 2 weeks. And so I'm not a Fosse expert or anything. I'm there because I can read music and I can play for dancers. That's why I was hired, and I'm a good musician. So I show up, and she looks at me and she says, do you know Big Noise from Winnetka? And I had never heard it at the time. It's a Gene Krupa big band,
right.
You probably know. But I'd never heard of it at that time. And I said, no. And one of the dancers says, I've got a cassette. She says, I said, anybody have the music? And of course, nobody has the music. And they had already choreographed to it. And they want me to play that arrangement.
Oh, my gosh.
So one of the dancers said, it was something Fosse had done early on. So one of the dancers says, I have a cassette of it. So they played the cassette tape in front of 16 people, the producer, Richard Maltby, the choreographer, Chet Walker, and Gwen Verdon, who's choreographing this, and she's one of the producers as Fosse's widow. So they play it once. And I somehow, something clicked. I knew what key it was in. I knew every single note and chord on that recording. It was about 2 minutes worth. I knew every rhythmic hit that they were going to do their jazz Fosse stuff to. And I just started playing it while they choreographed.
Whoa.
And I couldn't do that right now. But something in that moment showed me what I am capable of at times. And then it comes through, when I'm doing a real book video or I'm in performance now. But that was a glimpse of much higher functioning in music than I'd ever experienced myself.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. So, Ron, like I mentioned at the beginning, here we are. Man, we could go on all afternoon here. I mean, we can go on all afternoon. So you're going to have to make me a promise here before we wrap things up, man. Will you come back and join me on Jazz Panel Skills again here in the near future?
Oh, absolutely, Bob. I'm having a great time.
So much to talk about, and I definitely want to have you come back on. So where do folks, the book again, at Amazon, correct?
Yeah, you can find The Inner Game of Piano Improvisation at Amazon.
Your website address again?
Right, keyboardimprov.com.
Right, and they can find all your videos, YouTube, your real book.
Ron Drotos, D-R-O-T-O-S, Keyboard Improv, Ron Drotos.
Yeah, well, and I'm going to post all that. I'm going to post all that in the podcast episode as well, that people can get in touch with you and get access to all your great materials and information, man. On behalf of the entire jazz world, I want to just thank you for everything that you're doing. All the various aspects of education and jazz education that you have your feet in all these different in different places, and I just can't thank you enough for all that you're doing for everyone, for professional musicians like myself, and for students that are at the beginning of their journey. Thank you.
Oh well, I'm speechless, but thank you so much. I mean, like with you, it's so gratifying, and it's total immersion in teaching, performing. We get so much back from the people we're dealing with and helping. So it's a
no doubt.
pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Ron, it's been my pleasure. Thanks again, and we're going to have you back on Jazz Piano Skills here shortly.
Anytime.
Thank you.